Some of the most mysterious solved cases were only cracked by the dedicated, intensive work of a team of experts in true crime mysteries. In particular, murder mysteries require skilled crime scene investigators to understand the story of what took place and why. In some strange solved cases, this work may take years before justice is finally reached in the end. Number 5. On January 9, 1999, residents of Carlson Boulevard in Richmond, California, heard screams coming from the home of 28-year-old Mikia Wadley. One of her neighbors went to investigate. When he heard the screaming continue for more than 30 seconds, he tried the front and back doors but found both locked. He ran home and dialed 911. Police arrived at the scene too late. Entering through the now unlocked back door, they discovered a scary true crime mystery. Mikia had been smothered. Her hands were tied behind her back with shoelaces, and her face and head were covered with a blanket. An unknown assailant had cut her life short. The medical examiner charged with reviewing Mikia's attack theorized that the final blow might have come when the perpetrator tried to silence her. Forensic DNA evidence was collected from a number of points at the crime scene, including from Mikia's hands and under her nails, as well as from stains left on the carpet. However, DNA technology in 1999 was not advanced enough to create a full profile of the attacker. Mikia had been known to be hanging out with a friend named Steven the night prior to the attack. Without any evidence, though, police could not arrest Steven, and there were no other useful leads. In 2002, crime investigators once again attempted to create a DNA profile using evidence from Mikia's hands and the stain found on the rug. At this time, they were able to conclusively rule out Steven as the criminal, but they still had no idea who the attacker actually was. Finally, in 2020, the case was reopened once again, and new forensic evidence was sent for DNA testing, this time for material found under Mikia's fingernails. Thanks to a familial DNA databank that the state of California had been maintaining to aid in genetic genealogy searches, the profile returned a hit on a potential relative of the unknown assailant. The relative submitted their DNA and the case was officially solved. The murder was done by a friend of Mikia's who had never even been considered a suspect. Sadly, Jerry had passed away of an unsuspected drug overdose on January 20th, 1999, just days after attacking Mikia. Thanks to familial DNA, he was able to be identified long after his passing, and Mikia's family received some closure, even if Jerry was not brought to justice. Number 4. 22-year-old Tracy Tomko was a lifelong resident of Ohio who'd recently moved to Akron to start a new job as a financial analyst. An avid runner, Tracy was known to go for outdoor jogs before work on a nearly daily basis. But on August 11, 2000, she never returned from her run. Tracy was found lying in a puddle of water in a wooded area near her apartment. She'd suffered major physical trauma but had ultimately succumbed due to drowning, having been so injured that she was unable to clear her airway. She'd clearly been moved prior to her passing. Her case was an unusual murder mystery that would take hours upon hours of dedicated work by crime investigators to fully uncover. Ultimately, it was a near microscopic piece of evidence that led to Tracy's assailant being apprehended and brought to justice. A close examination of the crime scene revealed tiny shards of glass and plastic. The largest piece was no bigger than a quarter, but it was big enough to paint the picture of a crime story that was solvable. Someone had hit Tracy with their car at a high speed, causing serious injury. That individual had then relocated her body, placing her in the wooded area and then driving away. Police were determined to find this individual and hold him or her accountable. For more than 6 months, police searched for the car they believed the plastic came from. However, upon careful re-examination by trace evidence specialists at the Ohio State Bureau of Criminal Investigations, the plastic was identified as coming from an entirely different car, an early 1990s Ford Tempo. Within hours of the discovery, police were able to narrow in on a Ford Tempo that had a missing piece of plastic. Upon further investigation, it was uncovered that the owner, a man named Ralph Blackwood, had traveled out of state in August to get his windshield replaced. When he was confronted with the evidence, Ralph admitted culpability and pled guilty to the crime. Tracy's solved case today is a crucial example of the importance of trace evidence, even in the modern-day age of DNA testing. Without the plastic shards, Ralph might have never been brought to justice. Number 3. Gertrude Okenkowski, known to her friends as Trudy, was never without her canine best friend, Muffin. Trudy and Muffin went everywhere together. So when Muffin was abandoned in Trudy's car with the engine still running in January of 1998, those who knew the 60-year-old mother of two immediately suspected foul play. Trudy's friend, Melissa Bradbury, told reporters that she would never do that. She would never leave her dog, especially for that extent of time. Tragically, these suspicions were proven correct when Trudy's body was discovered the very next day. She had been dumped in shallow water at Engle Falls, a remote brook not far from downtown East Hampton, where her car was left. An unknown attacker had callously taken her life, creating a murder mystery that rocked the small town for decades. Trudy was last seen alive on January 11, 1998. She had reportedly traveled to a laundromat located at 82 Main Street in East Hampton, leaving Muffin in the car while she ran inside. She never made it out. On the afternoon of January 12th, her body was found in a stream off Tarsia Road. She'd been placed face down with her hands bound behind her back. The cause of death was strangulation. Crime investigators working at the scene quickly determined that the location was a dump site, not the scene of the attack. Drag marks and tire marks were both found to be present. Other crime scene evidence included tape, which was used to bind Trudy's hands. At first, leads in Trudy's case were extremely sparse. According to her daughter, she loved country music, polkas, Christmas songs, and going to church. She was a home health aide and had dedicated her life to taking care of the elderly. The senseless attack on such a well-liked woman was a scary mystery. In an attempt to gather more information, the East Hampton Police Department authorized a reward of up to $50,000 for any new leads. However, it was ultimately a piece of evidence that investigators had held onto since the 90s that led to a break in the case in 2013. The tape found at the crime scene. As early as 2008, crime investigators had suspected that a resident of the apartment above the laundromat by the name of Gerald Brian Tuttle was involved in what happened to Trudy. Gerald had a criminal record, including a previous assault against a woman. However, there was no evidence linking him to the attack. By 2013, though, advances in DNA technology meant police were able to obtain 2 new samples, one from the tape found at the site and one from Trudy's car. Both were from the same man. Investigators brought Gerald into the police station once more for questioning. While he was there, they were able to obtain DNA from a cigarette butt that he had discarded at the station. This unusual source proved fruitful, and Gerald was positively identified as the attacker. He was arrested in 2013 and was finally sentenced for his crimes in 2016, almost 20 years after the fact. Number 2. DNA evidence has enabled crime investigators to solve dozens of murder mysteries that were previously completely cold cases. Such is the case in the 1992 death of 29-year-old Nona Cobb, whose killer was finally held accountable in 2022. Not much information has been published online about Nona. According to a 1992 interview given by her sister, Vicki Gregory, Nona had a 3-year-old son named Josh, who was temporarily staying with Vicki. Vicki was quoted in the paper as saying that she thought Nona had made some wrong choices, but that her family loved her very much. Nona reportedly called almost every day to talk to Josh, so when she failed to check in early July of 1992, Vicki knew something was wrong. According to crime investigators, Nona was last seen on July 6, 1992, getting into a truck with an unknown man at a rest area on Interstate 85. Her body was found along the northbound side of I-77 in Surrey County, North Carolina. at approximately 6:15 in the morning. The identity of the trucker and his possible role in Nona's death remained a scary mystery for years. Nona's murder mystery received renewed attention in April of 1995 when a truck driver named Sean Goebel confessed to the murders of 3 women in North Carolina and Virginia. Sean reportedly targeted women and had a predilection for transporting them over state lines and dumping their bodies along major highways. Nona's case seemed to fit the bill perfectly. In addition, crime scene evidence containing DNA was recovered from Nona's body, meaning it could be tested against Sean's DNA. The subsequent tests came back negative. Although he was the primary suspect in Nona's case, Sean was not a match. Police were back to square one. For decades, Nona's murder case stagnated. With no known leads, investigators made little progress. In April of 2021, nearly 20 years after the attack, North Carolina police were finally able to apply advanced DNA technology to the sample collected from the crime scene. Genetic genealogy was used to trace the DNA profile to an unknown man who had left his DNA on Nona. He was proven to be a Mississippi man by the name of Warren Luther Alexander. Authorities arrested him in March of 2022. As of December, his exact connection to Nona or his motive in the attack remains unknown. It's possible it could have been a crime of opportunity. Investigators have said that they're looking into Warren's past to see if he may have had other victims. The case remains under investigation to this day. Number 1. The unusual murder mystery of a wealthy California mother of 3 came to a tragic end this year when her own husband pled guilty to her murder in 2012. Peter Chadwick, who press outlets have called a California millionaire, was finally apprehended in 2022 after a multi-year international manhunt that baffled authorities and tested the limits of police capabilities. Peter and his wife, QC, were married for more than 20 years. QC was a stay-at-home mom to 3 sons who she was raising in Newport Beach, California. Peter was the primary breadwinner, but on October 10, 2012, their seemingly perfect life collapsed into a scary mystery. That afternoon, police were dispatched to the couple's home when it was reported that neither parent picked up their sons from school. There, they found an obvious crime scene, including a broken red vase, bodily fluids in the upstairs bathroom, and an open safe. Neither adult was home. The following day, the scary mystery deepened when police received an unusual call from Peter Chadwick. He was at a payphone in Southern California, just a few miles north of the Mexican border. He said he had been kidnapped and QC had been killed by a man named Juan, who he had hired to paint their home. He said that Juan held a sharp object to his neck and forced him to load QC's body into a car before driving them both towards the border. However, from the start, crime investigators were suspicious of Peter's story. There was absolutely no evidence of Juan, and surveillance footage from the Chadwick's gated community, as well as toll footage, appeared to show Peter alone in the car. In addition, Peter had unusual defensive wounds on his head and neck, which did not match up with his story. Finally, and perhaps most surprisingly to police officers, Peter did not once ask about the safety of his children during the entire interaction, including the 911 call and subsequent interview. Just 6 hours after placing the call, Peter was arrested for his wife's murder. The following week, QC's body was located at a rural dump site in the California mountains, not in Mexico like Peter claimed it would be. Mounting evidence continued to point towards his guilt. Unfortunately, the crime story did not end there. Peter's bail was set at $1 million, which he could afford. He was released from prison after 2 months, and he surrendered his passport. But after 2 years on bail, when the case was approaching trial, he vanished without a trace. Peter Chadwick was suddenly a fugitive of the law. When investigators went to his home, they discovered a magnitude of evidence that indicated Peter had been planning to disappear for some time. He left behind books on how to disappear and how to change identities. When Peter left, he took a cab to an airport in Santa Barbara. Instead of getting on the plane, though, he waited for hours before taking another cab away from the airport. It was there that the trail went cold. He had with him more than $1 million in cash. For years, Peter evaded capture. He crossed the US-Mexican border on foot, eventually settling in a town 4 hours west of Mexico City. He changed his name and went by Paul Cook, and told residents that his family had passed away in a tragic accident. Finally, in 2019, authorities were able to trace a phone call that Paul had placed from Puebla, Mexico. He was extradited to California, and in February of 2022, he pled guilty to killing his wife. He's currently serving a sentence of 15 years to life. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts,